I have a review of two books that I have just finished reading from the library, so they really have nothing to do with Horror Mayhem or anything like that. One of them, the first one, is Uprooted, which by Naomi Novik, and this one I heard nothing but wonderful things about. The reviews on Goodreads are just completely over the top in favor of it. It won a bunch of awards, I believe. I just people raved about it when it came out. And I can see why that is the case on the one hand, and on the other hand I kind of have a little bit of a slight, and it's not a problem, it's just a slight like, why this particular book was the one that just went off the charts with how much everybody loved it. It is about a girl named Agnieszka, and Agnieszka is born a particular time when there is this particular wizard who will come to her village or her area around there, and every so many years he will pick a particular girl who's born in a certain time period, and that will become, they don't know what happens to these girls. They just they never move back to the cities, or they never move back to the little towns that they're from. They often move off to the big cities. They always say, yes, the wizard, he's great. He doesn't do anything bad to us. He treats us well, but something always kind of changes with them in the fact that they just can't come back to the life that they had been to before. Agnieszka and her family have all sort of thought that this other particular girl in the town was going to be chosen, Kasia. Kasia is just perfect and wonderful, and at least that's what Agnieszka thinks. And they have this idea that she's going to be the one. Of course the dragon, his name is the dragon. Of course the dragon is going to choose her. Turns out he comes down and chooses Agnieszka, which is completely out of left field for everyone. And she goes with him and goes to his castle, palace, wherever it is, off in the middle of nowhere, and finds out that she is actually a witch. And not just any witch, she's able to do a particular type of magic that he didn't even, the dragon didn't even know that was a type of that was a type of magic that could be done anymore, because it was done by a witch named Yaga, who I'm assuming they're referencing Baba Yaga in it, and she can do this type of magic, which is sort of intuitive. It's not really a set type of magic. That's why they all thought it was sort of myths that Yaga did this sort of stuff. So the problem is there's this thing called the Wood, which is evil and keeps encroaching on these different towns. It takes people, possesses them, does all these really horrible, terrible things, turns them into raging zombie type people. And Agnieszka kind of convinces the dragon to help her deal with the Wood in a certain sense, because Kasia gets taken by the Wood at some point, and she wants to help save Kasia because she's been corrupted by the Wood. And even though they figure out how to deal with the corruption part, the rules are still that Kasia needs to be executed. And there's also a queen involved in all of this, and the prince, her son, and it's just a whole very complicated mess. I understand a great deal why it has gotten the praise it's gotten, because the plot is not necessarily complicated, but you see very much how it all pieces together. All the different things, even things that you didn't think were going to be a big deal, turn out to be a big deal as it goes on. The thing I have that's a little bit of a strange thing with it is how much everybody raved and raved and raved. And it's really kind of formulaic, because it's your typical chosen one storyline. She of course is the most magical of all the magical in the world. She's of course able to do this crazy type of magic that no one else can do. She of course has this kind of not love story, but at least an undercurrent of some sort of a romance with the dragon. It's all, I don't know. I suppose I expected for something that was as raved about as this one that it was going to completely break the genre of fantasy, and it didn't really. It just was a very good version of what I've seen a lot of. So I'm not sure exactly what I think. I would think if I had heard nothing about this book and picked it up, I would have thought this is a really good book and very readable, and I am going to read more of this author and be very enthusiastic about that. The fact that I have heard like all these blurbs on the back of fresh and compelling and darkly compelling and da da da. The only one on the back that I'm like, I get what you're saying is Maggie Stiefvater, who reading Uprooted was like rediscovering a favorite old sweater, familiar and beloved. She kind of hit the nail on the head here. This is like trope heavy. This is the type of fantasy that you just see a lot of that kind, but done very, very well. So I give it a tentative 4 stars out of 5. Like, if I hadn't known about it beforehand, I might have given it a 5, but the hype around it had me expecting something different. So that sort of ended up being completely a different thing. The other book I read was by David Bushman and Mark Givens, Murder at Teal'S Pond. This is a true crime book about the murder of Hazel Drew, who inspired Laura Palmer in Twin Peaks. Of course, Hazel Drew was from the early 1900s. This was not a recent murder by any means, but the main creator, the writer for Twin Peaks, had heard of this growing up all the time, about this girl who had drowned in a pond, and they never found any evidence of what had happened to her, and all this and sort of stuff. The crux of the problem is not so much the crime. It's not solved, and they really don't have anything much to go off of, and even the authors don't really give much of a who we think did it. The more intriguing thing is Hazel Drew herself, because it seems like on the one hand she was this church-going wonderful, everybody talked about how wonderful, good girl she was, but she also had this other aspect of her that was in contact with lots of men kind of casually. She had money that people couldn't figure out why she had money to go on these trips and different things, that she was traveling all the time. She was very free. She was almost free in a way that it was kind of odd, because it almost seemed, to us now, it seems unsafe, that she would just interact with these guys, just on the casual, like, oh, you want to go boating with me today? Sure. I don't know who you are, but I will. I want to go for a buggy ride with me? Sure, I will. You can't figure out if she was that naive, or she was just kind of a flirt and didn't think much of it. It's a strange picture of a person that you get out of all of this, and the authors can't really provide much of an ending to the story, so it's a little bit frustrating, because clearly it's unsolved. The more interesting part is the strangeness just around Hazel Drew herself. That being said, looking on looking on Goodreads, this does not have the terribly high. I expected it to have a higher reading rating than it did, and it was only like 3 point something, and that kind of surprised me a little bit, because it is very, very readable and very good. It's just maybe not what people were expecting when somebody says, ooh, based on Twin Peaks and is based off of this murder, you expect a lot more, and it's not. It's just a very, very unsolved murder that had a very cold case, that had a lot of strangeness about the person around it alone. And I'm not saying she was in any way, shape, or form a bad person. It's just there was some weirdness. And that's more what makes it interesting than anything else. So I recommend both books. Just there's a little bit of trepidation about both of them in a different way. Like, if you're expecting a true crime knockout, we've got a wild murder with a wild murder and this is not it. This is more of just about the time period a little more, and more a study about a person who was kind of odd, not in an odd way, but her behavior was a little strange. And the other one is a very, very well-written retelling of a story, of a fairy tale story, Beauty and the Beast, I would say, but it is not groundbreaking by any means. At least in my opinion, it was not something that was completely earth-shattering. Just a very, very well-written retelling of a fairy tale. So it all depends on what you're what you're expecting to get into when you read both of these books. But I thought both of them were good.